Hello and welcome to Best Practices, Collecting Sensitive Data, a technical assistance training for the Louisiana Children's Trust Fund in partnership with the LSU Social Research and Evaluation Center. The purpose of this training is to provide an overview of marginalized populations, why it is important to collect sensitive data, and to review best practices related to data collection and data security. As we talk about sensitive data, it is important to recognize marginalized populations and who they are. Marginalized populations are individuals who have been historically excluded or oppressed based on identity characteristics such as gender identity, sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, and ability. For marginalized populations, these characteristics can be considered sensitive when reported. Agencies and organizations who work with marginalized populations should make promoting equity and inclusion a priority. Creating a space that is respectful and safe ensures that all people are treated with dignity and respect. Building relationships with clients and participants helps agencies with the recruitment and retention of marginalized populations. Agencies should engage in training to ensure they are familiar with how to engage with these populations and to effectively meet their needs. Some strategies to be mindful of when working with marginalized populations and collecting sensitive data include addressing implicit biases, which are biases that are unintended and unplanned that impact a person's actions and thoughts. Implicit bias can also be described as an automatic preference that goes unnoticed. These feelings encourage stereotypes about groups of people. It is important to be aware of and acknowledge these thoughts. When collecting data, it is common to question why you're doing so. It's easy to feel as though you're meddling or interfering in a client or participant's privacy, or to make them feel like you're doing so. Be careful in the manner in which you're asking questions and explain your reasons for asking such questions. In the interest of social justice, remember to stand for equal rights for all that enter your agency. Explore ways to advance social justice as it impacts marginalized populations served by your agency. To further promote equity and inclusion, it is important to use appropriate terminology. As a good rule of thumb, ask for feedback from members of marginalized populations to avoid using terms they may find offensive. Above all, always create an inclusive and safe environment. Personally identifiable information, known as PII, is data that can be linked to a person to identify them. They are unique identifiers such as date of birth, home address, cell phone number, and a driver's license. While sensitive PII are data elements that, if released, cause potential damage if connected to an individual. Sensitive data is data that should be protected at all costs. The types of data that you might be collecting during intake or registration from your clients and program participants include race, sexual orientation, sexual identity, immigration status, and religious affiliation. Both PII and sensitive PII are federally protected. You should be familiar with FERPA that provides protection from educational records and HIPAA that protects medical records. Get to know these statutes and rules that govern each. So why collect sensitive data? If you're receiving federal funds or state contract dollars, those funders want to know whether or not the dollars you are awarded are benefiting marginalized populations. LCTF wants to know for the same reason. As a state agency that funds your abuse and neglect programs, LCTF is interested in knowing which groups are receiving critical services around the state. They are also required to report those numbers to federal funders. As you begin preparing for the next grant cycle, you will need to collect demographics like race and age. But the federal funders for LCTF also want to know if programs are serving immigrants, members of the LGBTQIA community, underserved minorities, homeless individuals, and survivors of intimate partner violence. If you've not already done so, modify your intake forms to collect this information. Collecting data and reporting to these agencies helps to determine the impact of the dollars that are spent. Keeping account of these groups is also important as you modify your programs to include inclusive language and a more sensitive service delivery. And it helps with future grant proposals. Collecting this data demonstrates your work with marginalized populations. It provides evidence to funders that additional grant dollars will be used to continue to serve these populations. As you collect sensitive data, there are certain collection practices that you should follow. Before collecting data, present consent forms outlining what data will be collected and how it will be used. If necessary, review this form with your clients and participants before asking them to sign. Include a statement of confidentiality that ensures your clients and participants that their data will be kept private. This statement should describe the steps you will take to keep the data private. Intake forms should also include similar information. Take as many opportunities as you can to make marginalized clients and participants feel comfortable and safe about sharing their personal and sensitive information. When you're developing your survey instruments, ask questions that are inclusive and gain the most useful information. Use open-ended questions. Instead of other, provide a line to self-describe. This allows clients and participants the ability to self-describe in their own terms. Give clients the option to choose more than one option. Again, this empowers a client to self-describe as they're comfortable. Also list choices in alphabetical order. Any other order may suggest the importance of one group over another. Data security is key when dealing with sensitive information. It should be kept safe, confidential, and reported in a responsible manner. If collecting data using paper files, data should be collected, stored, and transmitted using the following best practices in data security. For paper files, always store your paper data files in a locked room, filing cabinet, or safe. Files should be kept for at least 7 years. Store paper surveys, intake forms, and sign-in sheets separately to maintain confidentiality. Never leave sensitive data unattended, laying around or visible to unauthorized users, and never take paper data files out of the agency. And for electronic data, store in a paper, password-protected computer or laptop. Be aware of data that can be viewed on a screen by an unauthorized user. Always log off computers that are not in use. Train staff on good data entry, storage, and transfer practices. And use encrypted email or alternative secure communication methods to transfer this information when necessary. There are serious consequences if sensitive data is not protected. Remember the federal acts protecting data that were mentioned earlier. Everyone is impacted, agencies and individuals. Marginalized populations could experience extreme stress and embarrassment, and there's a good chance that they develop a fear of accessing future services. An agency could suffer irreparable damage along with the loss of funding and incur legal fees. To wrap up, promote equity and inclusion in your agency. This helps with the recruitment and retention of marginalized population. Be aware of funders' expectations. They want you to report on the work you've done with marginalized populations. Create ways to ask and record sensitive information that is respectful. Your survey should allow clients and participants the ability to use their own terms and choose their own descriptions. Adhere always to federal data protection guidelines. And finally, develop a data collection and data security system that ensures confidentiality and protects sensitive information. Include these steps in your consent and intake forms. Review them with your clients and participants. If you have any questions related to collecting sensitive data or data security, please contact our office using the information here. Thank you.